All right, so let's switch gears now and go back to the river. So the place we were before was just kind of up here. You know, this is uphill, right? You're going uphill pretty steeply going this way, going west. And what we see first, kind of coming on to the grid, what did I do with, there it is. Coming onto the grid here is the Great Northern Track. It runs off the map here, but it makes this big loop and then goes up here. And then the NP track up to the freight house is off the map too, and it comes and crosses it at that diamond. Remember we saw that derailment earlier? Crosses it and it's just off the map here. So you've got the Great Northern Track coming into this area and it terminates. So when you go back far enough, Dan did a lot of this research. Again, thank you, Dan. The Great Northern had property that they owned for many years all the way over along here to their big facility at Delta Yard. But it was very narrow in there, and it was going to, I think, involve having to blast part of the hillside away probably to actually make room for the track. So they made an agreement with the NP early on to have trackage rights, shared trackage. And then the Milwaukee coming in this way had its own track past Eclipse Mill, out on into the river on pilings actually, because this was so narrow, there was very little room, and then on up to here, and it terminated near Weyerhaeuser Mill B. They were going to build all the way up to Bellingham at one point, but that all got the kibosh put on it. And they ended up working out an agreement with the Great Northern to ship their cars up to Bellingham after they closed down their barge. They had a barge into Bellingham until 1955, I think. But anyway, so you had 3 main lines in here potentially, but only 2 of them for a while, and then the Milwaukee pulled theirs out in, what did we decide, like 1940 or something? 36 to 40, they pulled that out. And so by this time, by the 50s, you've only got the NP track running all the way through here. Everybody else used it. So it made for an interesting, if you're into railroad operations or modeling, makes for an interesting situation because you've got 3 railroads having to be issued orders and that sort of stuff without signals or automatic blocks or anything to share that track. So it was all dispatched out of Tacoma, and they used this thing called the AB card order system. And you had to have a card in order to be on the track or else. And it was all low speed because it's all considered to be yard limits, so it wasn't like they were high speed or anything. But there are definitely stories, and there were a couple of incidents over the years where, for instance, an NP switch crew was out on the track when it shouldn't have been, and it ran into a Great Northern passenger train coming through the area. And you know, it was all low speed. Nobody killed, but people got fired and equipment got damaged and stuff like that. Okay, so coming into this area here, you've got, you remember down by Lowell, the NP track split. And so this is the line along the river, and then the line up, the high line, as we called it, off map here. And a couple of the guys were telling me during break that they were familiar with this high line business under another name called the Turkey Trail, which was kind of evocative because it was steep and overgrown and all kinds of stuff like that. And my research, the guys I talked to said Highline was more in the NP days and Turkey Trail was more after the BN came on. But you know, whether that's exactly true, I don't know, but certainly it could be known as by both names. Anyway, so now on to this. Okay, so you have the NP coming through here, and over time, they'd lengthened this siding to, as the trains got longer and longer, especially the Auburn-Everett time freight. And so you have the main tracks in the middle here, actually, and this was a siding, and you had crossovers, which you often do with tracks like this, so you can move groups of cars back and forth. You have the Milwaukee track coming in here and stopping by this time, again, because their main line originally went up this way into the river, but they got rid of all that, and so this just became like the end of their track. And then there was a jointly operated log dump here. You can see the red and orange dashes. That means 2 railroads cooperating. This is the big Eclipse Mill lumber business, and we're going to talk about that. And then you've got the Northern Pacific Depot here, and you have a few buildings for Eclipse here, like their cafe and their office. And you have other various NP tracks, because this is where the NP yard started and went north, squeezed under the bridge here up to the engine facility, which is the next segment we're going to look at. This is the old Highway 2 bridge, which is gone. We'll see a couple of pictures of that, the Hewitt Avenue Bridge. And then we're going to take a look at an inset map. You see this dotted box? We're going to look at this area because there were a bunch of businesses right here that the NP served, and we kind of zoom in a bit more so you can see that. All right, so let's get started. Okay, so this is Eclipse looking northwest parked over the river. Here's the NP track here. You've got the Milwaukee track here. You got the NP depot up here. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. But you can see it was quite a large business. And Harry Stuchel is still with us. I think he's 92, something like that. But he still goes into the office almost every day. Family business down there in the tower downtown. Wonderful person. He and his daughters spent a lot of time with Jack and me talking about the good old days. Here you can see lots of different cars. You got some log flats here. Looks like a couple of tank cars, some box cars. This is probably stuff that came in on the Auburn Everett time freight or is about to go back to Auburn. They would make up the train there on that track. And here you've got the Northern Pacific Depot there, what's known as the Caboose Track. And I think this is the photo. If you zoom in far enough, it's a little hard to see through the smoke, but there's actually a business car here, a passenger car. And Bob Harriman and some of the other veterans remember this. They'll never forget it because it always scared them. That was the rules examiner's car. And it would come to town every now and then. You'd have to take your test to make sure you were still going to be a good railroader. So that's where they all took their tests and sweated bullets there. And it just happened to be there the day they photographed made this photograph, which is pretty amazing. This is one of those Western Ways aerial photos I was telling you about. And now here we're going to look at this here, but this is that group of businesses that were served by the NP. And then just off here is where you get into the NP engine facility. Okay, so let's go ahead here. Now we're looking kind of northeast across the river at Eclipse. You can see the log dump track here. This is the big dry shed. And then this, Jack, if I remember right, this was the photo you really liked because it showed you all that detail of this neighborhood here, which is all obliterated by I-5 now. And then this is the blue track we saw earlier, the GNC line making its curve and going up this way. And you've got the mill part of the facility in here. You can see all the smokestacks and the office and things are up here.
I grew up in that neighborhood.
Oh, you did?
At 3101 and a half Maple, so I was right across from the house.
Oh my gosh, yeah. And is that house gone now from the interstate?
Unfortunately.
Yeah. And now we're looking southeast here. And so you can see the neighborhood really well here. So this is Pacific here because there's the depot. Which one's Maple? Is this Maple?
Yes.
So your house was right in here somewhere, huh? Probably, or right here. Yeah.
I'm sorry, yeah, it was 3101. The hotel is there now. So
Got it.
if I ever get to be homeless, I'm just going to go by the fire. That's where I grew up.
There you go. Yeah, you can see some logs in the river. Does anybody know why logs were stored in water? Yeah, it came from drying out because they would split. And then you've got a big sawdust pile here. And they were selling that sawdust, I believe, is what Harry told us, as one kind of fuel, because you could burn it in certain kind of stoves. Not in log form, just selling the raw sawdust.
Sawdust delivered around town for furnaces.
Yeah, there you go. And then you've got this stuff here, which is the stacks of irregular stuff that I'm not sure what was being done with, but it was all stacked up there. And you can see some boxcars. And I believe if we get over here far enough, you can actually see a caboose on the Caboose Track. Oh, maybe not in this photo, yeah, but yeah, I don't see any. No, there they are. A couple of caboose on the Caboose Track, as they should be. Caboose. And you got the mill cafe here and the office. All right, so now this is inside the mill. This is Sumner Iron Works, which we didn't look at down in Lowell, made machinery for lumber companies and logging and things like that for many years. And this is a big carriage that was installed inside Eclipse Lumber. This is out of the Herald. Thank you, Jack, or it was Larry actually on this one, I think. Thank you, Larry, for pointing me to this photo. And then here you've got the office in a flood. It seemed like nobody bothered taking pictures of things down along the river unless there was a flood, because it wasn't actually the building they were interested in, it was the flood they were interested in. So the MP track's behind us here. It may have been just enough higher that it didn't totally flood, but not by much. I think it's 48, 49 flood, we think. And this is looking south now. This kind of, the photographer turned 90 degrees, so I guess it was totally flooded. Here's a switch stand. It's pretty well underwater. This is the MP and Milwaukee tracks heading through here. You can see the poor boxcars marooned. That's one thing steam engines had over diesels, is they could run in flooded area. Not, of course, if there's too much, because the rails would fall off, but if there was low water, they could push through, whereas diesel engines have the electric traction motors at the axles. You can't run in water in that situation. And this is the overhead conveyor. I didn't talk about that before, but they move stuff back and forth to the dry shed. Here's another one from that flood. Again, Jack, thank you for that photo. The white building's over here that we looked at a minute ago. And this is a really cool photo. I think we got that from Harry, if I remember right. This is him giving a safety commendation to the team, and this is him here. In the early 1950s. And he was Harry Stuchel Jr., right? His dad, I think, was senior. Grandfather. Okay, grandfather. Okay, yeah. So that's a really cool photo. And some other people that worked there then. And this is some photos, I think, from Harry again. This is from the big fire. I'm going to show you some aftermath photos, but this was early May, like May 7th, I think it was, 1962. I write about that in the, I think it's the third part of my, or maybe second part of my Everett series. It's Bob Harriman was at home, and he lived in Snohomish, which is about 6 or 7 miles away, and he could see the flames from a hill near his house. They could see the smoke at the Canadian border, reportedly, after the fire. It burned really, really hot. It just burned the entire place to the ground. Nobody died. It happened during a shift change, and everybody got out of there. The few people that were there were saved. But it was so hot, it peeled the paint off the fire trucks. Harriman rushed to town and met up with an engineer and a train master, I think it was, and they ran a diesel into the siding and pulled a bunch of NP cars out before they melted. So they got a commendation for that, saved the company some money. This is what it looked like afterwards. It was gone. There was nothing left at all. And you can see this is the log dump. So we're looking north here, but it just turned into a pile of junk. This is all, like the day after or so. There's all that steam and smoke still rising.
The embers were coming over so much that my grandfather and my dad were out there spraying down.
Oh, I'm sure they were. Yeah, they could have easily caught on fire. But they were telling me that it was blowing towards the river most of the night, and that kept a lot of houses from going up. The wind changed, of course, but it wasn't predominantly in town. Because I think it would have been much, much worse otherwise. And this is, as you can see, it was just a pile of twisted junk. It was extremely hot, extremely hot. It incinerated. It was a complete combustion in a lot of the areas. There just wasn't anything left at all. This is the water tower we saw earlier. Another photo here. We don't know who this fellow is, but he's got a railroad cap on, so he might be connected to the MP. You can see some cars here. He's a what?
He's a good one.
Well, he didn't start the fire, is all I know. Yeah, but you can see we're looking south here, right? It's just totally decimated. And for many years after, we've got some other aerial photos from like 5, 6 years after, and it's still just a pile of junk. It was a number of years before they really actively cleaned it up. The Stuchels had logging interests down in Oregon, and they looked at rebuilding this. We have some copies of plans where they had looked into rebuilding. It just wasn't economically feasible. When you get to 1962, things are starting to kind of slow down here, and they just decided not to reinvest. It was really tough for them. You could tell the way Harry talked about it, even all these years later, that it was not, because they had their family here, and they really wanted to support local workforce, but it just didn't make economic sense. And they continued for many years with their Oregon operations before those have all been sold now.
What started that fire?
They think just a spark from some equipment. And as with most lumber mills, you had all this lubricating grease and things like that for the machines. And and it dripped down, because of the flooding, those buildings were elevated, and so you could get air passage underneath the building. You had sawdust all over the place. It was just It's like, how would you teach a Boy Scout to make a fire? Well, you have air come in the bottom, and you have a bunch of really stuff that loves to burn. It's, whew, I mean, it just blew up basically when it got going. Yeah, it's like a barn fire, right? Yeah, it's not. It's an explosion, exactly. So I think I've got a couple of those aerials here. This is from '63. You can just see it's just totally decimated. This is the sea line here. Just like a big pile of charcoal. And then looking the other way, or looking the same way, just zoomed in a little bit. And then this is looking east out over the river.
So it was both sides of the track?
Yeah, the dry shed just totally went up in flames too. The fire started here, but it didn't take long to spread because of all the, just super dry material. And remember that big pile of sawdust was there, And now we're looking west here.
Is that where they piled all of the tires that caught on fire in about 1980?
I don't know.
1983 and 84.
Farther south, down here. Oh, that's where the dump was, wasn't it, down here? Yeah, that's right. Okay. So here, that's that neighborhood that I-5's obliterated. And you can, if you look carefully, these are the Hill Avenue businesses we were looking at before. They're not that far away physically, but they are quite a bit uphill from here. Those are the businesses, and Standard Oil's here, and then you've got Seifert's here, and you've got the MP Freight House over here somewhere. This is Agnew Hardware, which is a big business that the GN shipped on. Okay, so that's that for that area.